Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 329 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on how to know if your adult child is hurting by listening to them. And it is Saturday the 14th of June 2025 as I record this. And may I just say, it is very hot, I'm boiling, I'm probably going to die by the end of this podcast episode, it feels so hot. So I'm recording this at about 7:10 at night, when this was like the latest I could possibly leave it because my housemate is their birthday weekend, so them and their family and their partner, who's another housemate, have decided to go out for a nice family dinner, which means I have the house to myself. This also means I can leave the doors open to let some small amount of cool air into my room and hopefully into my audiobook. I do not think my plan is going to work, but it's all part of the fun of podcasting. Anyway, so moving on to more important stuff. So the reason why today's podcast episode is a lot of fun is because most of the listeners of the podcast are between 40 years old and 50 years old, thanks to the information I get from my podcast distributor. So I know that quite a few conversations that I've had with readers and listeners of the podcast actually have children, and all of us, even if we don't have children ourselves, as aspiring or qualified psychologists in the future, it's very likely that we're going to have to support a parent, and we're going to have to support the mental health of a parent, because their child, or whether this is the relationship they have with their child, or they're worried about their child, this could be a maintaining factor for the mental health condition. So even if we don't have children, it's still useful to know how do we know if an adult child is suffering, because none of us, if we're parents or psychologists or even friends or loved ones, none of us want our friends or loved ones to be suffering or feel like they're alone. So that's why this podcast episode is really useful for all of us. So by the end of this podcast episode, we're going to understand and how to tell if your adult child is suffering by listening to them. What are the key phrases that you might want to look out for? And most importantly, what do you do if your adult child is suffering and in pain? So you got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is rather good because I love comedy. Satire sharpens the blade of criticism. The abundance of satirical memes, videos, and comedy channels means that many of us are regularly exposed to this style of humoristic critique. It would therefore be interesting to know how its impacts may differ from those of a more straightforward type of criticism. However, despite its prevalence in everyday life, open quote, academic efforts to understand satire in the psychological sciences are surprisingly sparse, close quote. Note the authors of a recent paper in the Journal of Experimental Psychology General. Authors from Santa Clara University and Northwestern University set out to start to address this by exploring the impact of satire on one particular factor, the reputation of the individual being targeted. They find that not only can satirical takes deal more damage than criticism alone, but it seems to encourage a level of dehumanization which could limit the ability of the targets to recover their reputation. Okay, now this is quite a brilliant one because, of course, I'm not going to name any names, but there's two extremely rich and wealthy people in the world, and please note this is not a political show, who have been having a very major blow up, and there's been lots of satire around these two individuals, whoever they are. And it's been quite funny. Like, I've actually seen some quite brilliant clips, and I've been wetting myself laughing. So it's just like quite fun though. And even when it's politicians that I don't particularly like over here in the UK, satire is always like really funny. Funny though, and I could actually give quite a few examples, but again, though, this is not a political show. So, the one that I do want to point out is that satire is absolutely brilliant, it's funny, and it really is part of our everyday lives. But I've never really thought about it from the idea of criticism. A criticism so much so in the fact that it's having a major impact on our behaviour and what we think and how we perceive people. But I guess that just goes to show that one, I tend to be quite involved in the politics side of it anyway, so I tend to know what's going on. So that's where I tend to get my information and criticism, like facts and figures. That tends to be how I get my criticism. But I know the vast majority of people, when it comes to politics, they don't so much rely on facts and figures. They actually rely on their emotions and what feels right, what feels correct. It was a massive argument that one of my friends had though, with their family this week. So anyway, I think that we do really need to start thinking about this from an academic point of view, because this is something that we've got to understand more. Because satire, it is a major part of our lives. It is clearly having an impact on attitudes, reputations, etc. So I think for the sake of human behaviour and other people, we've actually got to start thinking about this and understand what are the psychological mechanisms behind this, etc. So just some interesting food for thought. So the next one is emotional typecasting of emergency callers may mislead investigations. We've all had that hunch that something isn't quite right. A student seemingly unusually anxious in a test, someone looking around nervously in a supermarket, or a partner keeping an unusually tight grip on their phone. Such behaviours can all rouse suspicion, especially if they seem out of place. What type of actions are likely to trigger suspicions of wrongdoing is the focus of a new study, led by Jessica Sorrento and published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Attitudes and Social Cognition. Across 4 studies using real and simulated 911 calls, Sereno and her team find that when people don't de-escalate strong emotions during a traumatic event, others are more likely to suspect them of wrongdoing or even of committing a crime. This finding not only has implications for those who express or process emotions in non-stereotypical ways, but potentially for the resources allocated to an already stretched emergency services. Okay, so there's definitely a few things I want to say about this one. First of all, the first paragraph. We've all had a hunch that something isn't quite right. I literally just had safeguarding training again yesterday as part of my summer core outreach work there, where I'm working a lot of different events every day for the next 4 weeks. So I'm very familiar with that, and I've already done 8 or 9 safeguarding reports, to be honest, in my 6 years of outreach, which is a lot. Like, whenever I say that to people, they're like, wow, like, I must be one of the top people. But that's just because I've worked so many outreach events. Anyway, so the thing that I want to say about this one is that, to be honest, dramatically concerning, because thing about people who express or process emotions in non-stereotypical ways. This is a major issue because typically the stereotypes are flat out wrong. For example, use my own example of rape. Stereotypically, when someone is raped, they are female, they are kicking, screaming, punching, scratching. They're trying to get away like their life depends on it. They do tons of different bits and pieces. In reality, like I would say a good 90%, they don't do the fight response. We all do the fawn response. I say this in air quotes, let it happen because we want to get away from the person ever. Because as soon as the person's done, we hope beyond hope they're going to let us go. We go into survival mode. We don't fight back because if we fight back, what's the other person going to do? If they're stronger and they're bigger than us, they're going to pin us, they're going to physically harm us, etc. So the thing about stereotypes is I just explained my reaction to when I was raped, and tons of other people will do the same. Same though. But because I'm processing the emotions and I'm expressing them in non-stereotypical ways, one, people probably wouldn't believe me, and also they wouldn't allocate many resources to my case. This is one of the reasons why I never went to the police, etc. That's all coming out in a future book, which should actually be coming out in the next few months. Anyway, so I'm just trying to say that this is really concerning. This is not a good finding. And now that we've got this finding, we absolutely have to create an intervention or something to counteract this, because this is dangerous. So moving on to the final one. Cisnormativity impacts on trans and gender diverse people. Despite thousands of the years of diverse gender expression, many trans and non-binary people still grapple with the impact of cisnormativity, the belief that cisgender people whose gender matches the body they were born with, are right or normal, whilst others are not. The pressure to conform to this expectation can significantly affect mental health. Societal messaging around gender, being inextricably linked to biology, for example, may affect someone's ability to feel safe and happy as themselves. At a time when trans people are being increasingly targeted, understanding the impacts of societal cisnormativity is more important than ever. This topic is explored in a new study by a team at Durkin University, which examines the core emotional needs of transgender and gender diverse people and how they are supported or disrupted by different kinds of societal messaging. Through their qualitative analysis, they find that these core beliefs are often frustrated by pervasive cisnormativity. So I will definitely be reading this paper after I've recorded the podcast, because I should definitely use this in my dissertation, and this would actually be quite useful, to be honest, choosing my introduction, because I have to start doing my dissertation again at some point though, and my research is on transgender mental health. Anyway, so there's a few things that I could say about this. I've done entire podcast episodes supporting trans rights. Thursday's a podcast episode that came out last week that was explaining the difference between biological sex, gender, and gender identity. So if you want to learn more, definitely check out that brilliant podcast episode. Also, I would just say the key really is in the first line. Despite thousands of years of diverse gender expression, transgender individuals, non-binary individuals, people not being a man or a woman, this is nothing new. New though, this has only really happened since the colonial times. and cis-normativity are being pushed onto other cultures. All I would say at the end of this psychology news section is that if you meet a trans person, treat them with respect, use their preferred pronouns. It's not difficult, and to be honest, if you make a mistake, apologize. No one's going to get angry with you. And there's just so many myths and misconceptions about how transgender people will react if you make a mistake. And there's a lot of fear mongering from anti-trans people. But to be honest, look at the past podcast episodes, because there's a lot of trans content here or here on the podcast, and it really will help you to get a good understanding about what trans people are actually like and how to support them. I also have a book, Clinical Psychology and Transgender Clients, available in all the usual places if you want to learn more. So, I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. It's starting to get a bit hotter, so I definitely think after the personal update, I'm going to stand outside. I'm going to stand right next to my fan before I record the content part of today's episode. But besides from the sheer heat, which has actually been lovely, it's been really nice going outside, going for a walk, sitting in the sunshine, and just enjoying the wonderful weather. So that's been really nice. Then in terms of university stuff this week, it was a bit awkward because originally in my to-do list, and I write a massive to-do list every Sunday night for what I want to do the week ahead. And originally I'd put in a lot of time though, aside to do my dissertation. Because my supervisor was going to give it back to me, do my introduction, and do all the things except the discussion section. And she was going to give me a lot of feedback on it though, because she wanted it to be the best it possibly could be. But because of some unforeseen personal life stuff that she couldn't get around to it. So it's been a bit of a weird week because of that. So because I've had literally outreach work to do, and my normal structure's been a bit weird, and there's been a lot of different other factors which really made this week feel quite unsettled. But I am looking forward to next week onwards. Not only because I get my dissertation back, so I can start working on that, but because I start the summer core period at my university. So because I'm an outreach and ambassador for the outreach and widening participation team, for the next 4 weeks, I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of different activities, resources, and other stuff with the students. So some of the activities that I was going to do next week was a finance talk. So on Monday, I was going to give a finance talk, which, finance talks can test anyone's presentation abilities, especially when they're online, because finance, it is so dry. I have no idea how to make it interesting. Normally, I'm very good at presenting, performing, being engaging, but when it comes to finance, even I have my limits. So, but a few days I am really looking forward to is the Constellation Week at my university, where the students will be making homemade aloe vera. They will also be doing a pigment painting, so we're making paints from rocks and minerals, and there's some other stuff. I know there's a food web thing which I hope they've been approved, because no one ever likes that one. That one is a little bit dull. And then there's something else which I don't really remember. But there's a lot of fun activities, and it's really good to get there because I've met some of the ambassadors who I'm going to be working with, and it should be an absolutely brilliant 4 weeks. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, colinwiley@colinwiley.net, And you can always leave a comment on the show notes at ConnWiley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me at Sci-Fi Wiley, leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn post. And also always feel free to send a picture of where you're listening from. I always love to see where all of you are listening from all over the world. And the reason why I always love to hear from all of you is because it really helps to make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Introduction to Psychotherapies, a clinical psychology introduction to the different types of psychological therapy. And the reason why this is a great sponsor for today's episode is because last January, so January 2024, I did a podcast episode on how can a child therapy help the relationship between the adult child and the parent. And this is what is a core for today's podcast episode because either if your child is struggling, then they might need some therapy, and they might need some psychological support. So this great, really easy to understand book gives you a wide range of different psychological therapies, which might be useful to them. Of course, none of my books are any sort of official advice, but this book looks over CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, psychodynamic therapy, emotions therapy, couples therapy, imager therapy. So it looks at the really common ones, but also some of the rarer ones of which we don't really tend to focus on too much in mainstream clinical psychology. So it's a great book. It breaks down all of the different therapies into easy to understand chunks so that just you can read it, understand it, and enjoy learning about it. None of my books are boring textbooks whatsoever. And even if your adult child doesn't need a psychological support, maybe some child therapy or maybe another form of a psychological therapy will help improve your relationship. So the book also contains options for that. So I really do recommend this. It's a great, really easy to understand book. That was a lot of fun to research, read, and write up. So I loved it. So I know you're going to love it too. So there's Introduction to Psychotherapies, a clinical psychology introduction to the different types of psychological therapy, available for all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, the local library or local bookstore if you request it. And if you want the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence, then now you can, at selected audiobook retailers like Kobo, Google, Spotify, and Barnes & Noble, and selected library systems like Overdrive, Biblioteca, and Overdrive. So whilst my books help to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my patrons because your support shows that you like the show and you want to continue. So if you want to become a patron of the show and get tons of great rewards, including over 60 exclusive blog posts, which will be made for podcast episodes for weeks, months, or even years, then definitely head on over to patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can at buymeacoffee.com/ConWiley. So that's enough of the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode, after my little break outside in the cool air. So moving on to the content part of today's episode, we're going to be learning about how to tell if your adult child is hurting by listening to them. And it turns out, because I opened my window, someone is having a barbecue and a party nearby. Thankfully, I can't hear it with my window shut, but the cool air is just not happening. Anyway, diving into the important stuff, even though I think this commentary is actually quite funny. One of my weirdest habits is I'm amazing at amusing myself. Apologies if this is like your first ever episode of the podcast. Normally I don't do this. Okay then. So, diving into today's podcast episode. How to tell if your adult child is hurting by listening to them. A lot of adult children will never come to their parents and simply say that they're struggling. Partly, I think this is a cultural thing, because in Western culture, we're told that we need to be strong, independent, and we need to be able to solve our own difficulties no matter what. Also, on a personal level, there might be some kind of fear of the judgment or fear of failure. We don't want to admit to our parents that we're struggling because what will they think of us? How will they react? And so on. Therefore, adult children are much more likely to subtly drop clues about their struggles, whether they mean to or not. This is where the 7 phrases that we're going to talk about in today's podcast episode are critical. In addition, as aspiring or qualified psychologist, this is an important topic to talk about, because at some point in our clinical psychology career, we will have to support and work with a parent. This adult might have an adult children, and the clients might be worried about them, and the adult children might be a small or large maintaining factor in their mental health difficulties. As a result, if you are aware of these phrases and the true meaning behind them, then maybe we can use this knowledge to help our clients understand what's happening in their own lives and how to rectify it if appropriate. Personally, I never wanted to open up to my parents because they were invalidating and they never really supported me in my mental health up until a few years ago. I know a lot of parents aren't like this, but sometimes adult children don't want to open up because they don't want to be emotionally hurt by their parents' reaction, responses, or invalidation. What are the 7 phrases that reveal your adult child is hurting? Firstly, an adult child might simply say, I don't want to talk about it. And I think we can all remember instances of when we've heard this or when we've actually said it to someone. It was only the other week when I was saying this to my friends and housemates, so I didn't want them to judge me for a particular thing that was normal for a lot of people, but they would have disapproved. As a result, when someone says, I don't want to talk about it, you could take this as a sign of rebellion or avoidance. In reality, this is actually a sign of being misunderstood and to show a protective shield against the vulnerability of opening up. I'll explain more about what the parents can do later in the episode, but for me, I always find it easier to open up and overcome this I don't want to talk about it after the person has shown me that they will respect and listen, and even if they don't agree with what happened, they won't invalidate me. Secondly, an adult child might say, I'm just tired all the time, and normally you might brush this off as them not sleeping very well. This might be a cause for concern all by itself, because why aren't they sleeping? There might be something that you think about, what's on their mind, and so on. Yet feeling tired could be more than a lack of physical rest and sleep. It could be chronic emotional fatigue, and anxiety, depression, and burnout, as well as trauma, can be the cause of this fatigue too. Personally, during the worst of my mental health caused by my rape trauma, I was constantly fatigued. Yes, it was partly because of the lack of sleep, because I couldn't sleep very well with the constant PTSD, nightmares, and flashbacks. Another aspect of the constant emotional fatigue of having to relive the trauma over and over again, and the constant panic and anxiety attacks and so on, that all caused massive emotional fatigue for me. Thirdly, an adult child might say, you wouldn't understand. For a parent or friend, this might be very hurtful to hear, and whilst I have never said this directly, I often think it. This is often why I refuse to open up about a lot of things to my friends and my parents and other family members. When I say you wouldn't understand, this isn't me rejecting them. It is me focusing on my fear of judgment and me not wanting the past pain that this person has caused me to repeat. I really want to be understood, but I have no idea whether I should even let you in or not. And actually, this is something that I really struggled with when my partner broke up with me, because they had a lot on their plate, their chronic health was getting worse, and they didn't have time to date me, despite how really sweet and lovely I am. And I know this sounds like a complete excuse from them, but I know it wasn't, and that isn't the point of this episode. There are other nuances too. Yet, I was very reluctant to tell my friends and my housemates when they asked me how was your day, so I didn't want them judging or blaming me, which is something that they've done a lot before when my social relationships go wrong. Sometimes they were completely right to do that, I will admit, and sometimes they were seriously wrong to do that, and they caused me a lot of pain. I didn't want that to happen again, but I did eventually tell them briefly, and it was okay. Then I told one of my good friends about it, and they were lovely, and they were so sweet about it. Like, when I read their text, I was like, oh, that's lovely. Fourthly, an adult child might say, I feel like I'm falling behind. This might sound like a strange one at first, because a parent might not understand why an adult child feels like they're falling behind, or if they're a university student, or adjusting to a new job, then we might normalize this behavior and dismiss it as a normal part of life. Although in reality, this simple phrase might reveal a deeper sense of inner shame, and a lot of young adults feel they're falling behind because of unfair invisible standards about their life milestones, relationships, as well as careers. I remember my brother mentioning in a passing once a few years ago that this is one of the reasons why he just didn't go on social media. His mental health wasn't great because on Facebook he saw all of his childhood friends were getting married, having kids, buying houses, and he didn't, and he didn't have any of that. He was struggling and really felt like he was falling behind. Thankfully, he's doing a lot better now. A fifth phrase that an adult child might say is, I'm just trying to get through the day. This is a phrase that I used so much when I was dealing with the fallout of my rape. Of course, a lot of people use this phrase without having to deal with trauma, but this is survival mode in a sentence. This simple phrase means that someone is experiencing overwhelm, hopelessness, and / or anxiety, and your child might feel like they're drowning in silence. Personally, my entire 2024, and even some of my 2025, when I was dealing with my anorexia, I felt like I was constantly drowning. I was struggling, and I was being forced to take it one day at a time. Thinking about anything more was just too much. My physical and mental health would change too much day to day to possibly plan anything more than that. It was awful, and I didn't want to open up. I didn't want my friends and my parents to know just how much I was struggling or what I was dealing with. Also, I didn't want their invalidation. I didn't want them to say stupid things that wouldn't support me and so on. And ultimately, an adult child might say, what's even the point? This is something that I've said or definitely thought a lot over the past year, especially around the time I did my 3 suicide attempts. Because what's even the point is a major sign of hopelessness. This means an adult child might be questioning their purpose or their will to even keep going, and this phrase needs to be heard with a lot of care. I don't mean that you automatically need to be concerned about them being suicidal, but you need to listen to them without judgment and with compassion and empathy. Listen to why your adult child doesn't see the point and just create a safe space for them to talk about what's troubling them. It could make the world of a difference, and this is something that I really appreciate about my family now. When my parents ask me how I am, there is a safe space where I can talk about the truth, what little things are annoying me and more. Sometimes it is nice just to have the space where I can talk about the small annoyances as well as all the great and wonderful things happening in my life. I always think it's better to let the small annoyances out and use them as bonding moments with friends and family before they morph into something larger that drains your mental health. Finally, an adult child might say, "I'm fine." This is definitely something all of us have said and done about 100 times in our lives. Most of the time, if we're close with a person or if we know them very well, we can tell when this is a lie. For example, when my housemate says, "I'm fine," most of the time I know they're lying and they're putting up emotional armor to deflect my question. Sometimes, when adult children say this, they are genuinely fine. Yet, when it is overused or delivered too quickly or with flat tone, it is often hiding the fact that the other person simply doesn't feel safe to tell you the truth. What can parents do to help adult children? I think the most important thing when you hear your adult child use one of these phrases is to approach it with a sense of openness and curiosity. In other words, don't take it personally. The emotional pain your child is already experiencing will make them withdrawn because they are overwhelmed. If you get annoyed, angry, and if you push them to open up, then they will only withdraw even more because they don't see you as a safe space. As well as parents should listen to what's beneath the surface, because when adult children use these phrases, they are giving you clues to their real emotions and experiencing, so listen to their timing, to repetition and tone. A personal example is when my family got really angry at me, I will repeat, after I was raped, because they were saying how they were going to drag me down to the police station and more. That was terrifying for me. And that anger, that annoyance, and that invalidation of me and my emotions was the last thing I needed given how much I was struggling. In addition, it's a good idea that parents model openness by sharing their feelings and doubts so they can invite more honesty from them. This is something that I like to do, and this is why I don't think it's a bad thing to share small annoyances and small things that you don't like. This creates a space where you can be honest with each other about your lives, and you can drop the pretense that you and your lives are perfect and fine, because no one's is. Also, it's useful for parents to validate your adult child's experiences, because instead of automatically offering solutions, just try and validate them. For example, it can be really meaningful to hear something like, "That sounds really hard. I'm here if you want to talk about it." Finally, parents that can offer their adult children steady support, because changing relationships, going through, getting through to a withdrawn adult child, and creating a safe space all take time. It took me and my family months of work on both sides to have the great relationship that we have today. Yet a simple, repeated messaging like, "I love you no matter what," can slowly help to break through the defensive wall that your adult child has in place. Conclusion. Ultimately, at the end of this podcast episode, it's important to be aware that no adult child will ever say, "Help me." And if they do, they are amazing. They are seriously like gold dust. I couldn't think of saying anything worse. But if you truly listen to what your adult child is saying, how they are saying it, and how often they're saying it, then parents really can become a safe haven for adult children, no matter what they're dealing with. And that is the lovely and powerful feeling for both a parent and an adult child to have. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did, because this was just a really lovely podcast episode to do, considering how busy I've been this week and just how weird this week's been, full stop. So if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, then please check out Introduction to Psychotherapies, available in all the usual places. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis and get access to tons of exclusive rewards, then please head on over to patreon.com/The Psychology Work Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then please head on over to buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time, because I've not died from the heat. Bye bye. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at connorwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.